Welcome to Sensual Sequence Contents, home of romance and sensual life stories received and shared. That day when my QPE teacher, Mr. Campbell, did something so unexpected, it became a moment I would remember for the rest of my life. It started like any other day at high school, a blend of monotony and chatter in the hallways, but as the day progressed something about it felt different. The air seemed heavier, or maybe it was just my nerves. QPE was my last class of the day, and while I usually enjoyed it, the thought of Mr. Campbell filled me with a strange mix of excitement and tension I couldn't quite explain. Mr. Campbell had only been at our school for a year, but in that time he had become a favorite among students. He was in his late 20s, he was fit, energetic and charismatic with sharp green eyes and a smile that could light up any room. He wasn't the kind of teacher who demanded respect through authority. Instead, he inspired you to do your best because you don't want to disappoint him. For me, however, there was something more of a connection I couldn't ignore, even if it made me feel guilty. When class started, we followed the usual routine of warm-ups and drills, which quickly transitioned into an intense game of dodgeball. I wasn't the most athletic girl in class, but I held my own, dodging and weaving as balls flew past me. My focus was divided though, as I kept catching glimpses of Mr. Campbell on the sidelines. His whistle hung loosely around his neck as he shouted words of encouragement to everyone on the court. "Keep moving, don't stand still," he called out, his voice clear over the chaos. Every time he said my name specifically, I felt a jolt of energy surge through me. It spurred me to move faster and jump higher. I wasn't just playing to win, I was playing to impress him. By the end of the game, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding from the exertion. Mr. Campbell gathered everyone around for a quick debrief on our performance. His gaze lingered on me a moment longer than necessary, and I felt my cheeks flush despite the cool air in the gym. "All right, that's it for today," he announced, clapping his hands together. "Hit the showers and I'll see you all tomorrow." As the rest of the class filed out, I lingered, taking my time to put away the equipment we had used. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was stalling, hoping for an excuse to stay behind. Mr. Campbell noticed, of course. "Do you need some help with that, Mara?" he asked, stepping closer. I shook my head quickly. "No, I've got it, just wanted to make sure everything's put back right." He gave me a small smile, the kind that made my stomach flip. "I appreciate the effort, you're always one of the last to leave, aren't you?" I shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious under his gaze. "I guess I just like making sure everything's in order." "Well," he said, leaning casually against the wall, "it doesn't go unnoticed. You've got a good work ethic, Mara." It's rare to see that his words made me feel warm inside, a feeling that only deepened when he clapped a hand on my shoulder. It was a brief casual gesture, but it somehow felt more intimate than it should. Haven looked up at him, startled by how close he was for a moment. Neither of us said anything. The silence stretched heavy and charged until he finally cleared his throat and stepped back. "You should head to the showers before the hot water runs out," he said, his tone light but his expression unreadable. I nodded, grabbing my bag and heading toward the locker room, my heart pounding in my chest. I took my time waiting until the room was empty before I turned on the water. Why did I feel like this? Why does every interaction with Mr. Campbell leave me feeling off balance, like I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't define, and no matter how much I told myself it was wrong? I did want more. I was still lost in thought when I heard the locker room door open. My heart jumped and I froze, straining to hear who it was. Footsteps echoed against the tile floor, slow and deliberate, and I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread settled over me. "Mara," the sound of Mr. Campbell's voice made my breath catch. I quickly turned off the water, grabbing a towel as he stepped into view. He was standing near the sinks, his arms crossed over his chest, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Everything okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning me briefly before meeting my gaze. "Yeah, I just lost track of time," I said, my voice shaky even to my own ears. He nodded, but his expression didn't soften. "You've been pushing yourself hard in class lately, I've noticed." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just stood there, my pulse racing as he took a step closer. "I'm serious, Mara," he continued, his voice lowering slightly. "You're a good girl and I don't want you overdoing it." The earnestness in his tone made my chest tighten, and before I could think better of it, this word slipped out. "Why do you care so much?" His eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed caught off guard. Then his expression softened and he took another step closer, close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw and the way his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed. "Because you're worth caring about," he said quietly, the words hanging in the air between us like a challenge. I didn't know what to say to that. My mind was a blur of emotions, confusion, hope, fear, all tangled together in a knot I couldn't untangle, and then before I could stop myself I reached out my hand, brushing against his arm. His arm was warm under my touch. The fabric of his polo shirt softened against my fingertips. I hadn't planned to reach out. It just happened, like my body was acting on instinct before my mind could catch up for a moment. He froze, his eyes locked on mine, and I saw something flicker across his face that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't shock though, or anger. If anything, it was curiosity. "Mara," he said, his voice softer now, almost cautious. I dropped my hand quickly, my face heating up as I stumbled to explain myself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He shook his head, cutting me off. "It's okay," he said, his tone steady and reassuring, though his eyes remained locked on mine, searching. "I just wasn't expecting that," he said. "Neither was I replied. The tension in the air between us was almost tangible now, and I found myself gripping the edge of the sink behind me, trying to steady my breathing. The room felt smaller somehow, and I didn't know why. "I should go," I said finally, my voice barely as above a whisper, but even as I said it I didn't move. I couldn't. He took a step closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from him, now the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the humid air. "You don't have to," he said quietly, his eyes softening. "Not if you don't want to." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burn. "Mr. Campbell." "Call me Greg," he interrupted gently, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "We're not in class." That smile did something to me. It made my chest feel tight in a way I couldn't explain. "Greg," I repeated, the name feeling foreign on my tongue but strangely right at the same time, and before I realized what I was doing, my lips found a way to meet his. He was completely frozen as I moved my tongue over his mouth for a brief seconds, and suddenly I pulled back. As the air thickened with an unspoken tension, I forced myself to take a step back, gripping the sink behind me. My mind was spinning. What was I doing? What was I hoping for? "Mr. Campbell," Greg exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. The smile that had played on his lips faded, replaced by something else. Regret. Realization. "Mara," he said, his tone now firm but kind. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay to feel. But it's also something we need to acknowledge for what it is. A line that shouldn't be crossed." My stomach twisted. Embarrassment, disappointment, relief. I wasn't even sure. I nodded quickly, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something stupid. "I admire your dedication," he continued, his green eyes steady on mine. "And I don't want you to think for a second that your worth is tied to my attention. You're talented, smart, and capable, on your own." The lump in my throat made it hard to speak, so I just nodded again. The weight of the moment was suffocating, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. He stepped back, giving me space. "You should get dressed. It's late." His voice was gentle but final. I turned toward my locker, suddenly desperate to put on my clothes and escape. What had I been thinking? By the time I left the locker room, the gym was empty, the only sound my own footsteps echoing through the hallway. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp evening air as I stepped outside. The heaviness in my chest hadn't entirely faded, but something had shifted. I wasn't a little girl with a crush anymore. I was a young woman learning about boundaries, about feelings, about myself. And while it stung, I knew that tonight, I had been taught one of the most important lessons of all. I walked home alone, letting the cool air clear my head, already knowing that tomorrow would feel different, better. About a week later, Mr. Campbell wasn't seen in class or in school anymore, and when I made inquiries, I was told he resigned from his job and left. I felt terrible for some weeks, but I hoped wherever he is fine and doing better. Hi guys. If you love romantic and intimate scenes that make your heart race, then you're in the right place. Here on Sensual Sequence, we bring you the most captivating moments filled with passion, chemistry, and pure emotion. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let's build a community that appreciates the art of love and connection. Subscribe now and let's dive into the world of romance together.